So, you're stuck at home and you want to write a poem. What would you write? Maybe a love poem. Something beautiful where you compare your beloved's eyes to the stars, her blushing cheeks to blossoming roses. Or how about something like, "Hey you, you're so beautiful, but soon you'll be old and ugly, and then you'll die. You should have babies!" The first 17 of Shakespeare's sonnets are all on this theme: have babies. These sonnets are not love poems, they are pleas for procreation. The poet is writing to a young man so gorgeous that he must have children in order to preserve his beauty for future generations. I'll be honest, it's not what I was expecting when I first read these. So to honor this theme of baby making, and to fight off the crippling boredom, I thought that we would do something kind of fun and put some buns in the oven. We got ingredients, we got guest actors, we got weird poems, so follow along. Why did Shakespeare start writing to some handsome young man, telling him to do the offspring thing so that he could keep his beauty alive? It seems like a strange thing to do. And as usual, nobody knows. But remember, Shakespeare liked money, and there's reason to believe that he got a commission to write these sonnets. I like the theory that some older nobleman on his last legs was trying to get his wild and crazy son to settle down and start a family to preserve the family name, and money and land and all the other rich people stuff. Maybe if he got London's hottest playwright to tell his son to settle down with a nice English girl and get fruitful, it might actually work. Nobody knows who the young man really was, although there is endless debate about it. But in the poems, the character comes across very clearly as a somewhat impetuous young man. Very handsome, very popular, very active, very prone to scandal. And whether or not there was a real-life equivalent for this Elizabethan bad boy for the poems, it doesn't really matter. Although it was probably the third Duke of Pembroke. In the same way, is the character of the poet really William Shakespeare? Are these poems autobiographical? Well, who knows? I like to think that they are. But whoever wrote these poems definitely wrote Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and As You Like It, because there is so much in these sonnets that is echoed all throughout the plays. The first 17 sonnets are both very strange and yet steeped in tradition. It's very Shakespeare. The strange part is their message: breed. Look at the very first lines of the very first sonnet. "From fairest creatures we desire increase, that thereby beauty's rose might never die. But as the riper should by time decrease, his tender air might bear his memory." We see that classic antithesis balancing increase and decrease, images of nature's growth and decay, and subtle internal rhymes like air might bear. But more importantly, we're given the thesis for this whole sequence: you are so beautiful, the world deserves more, have kids. It's all throughout these first 17. And what's more, the poet goes on to really yell at the young man and call him out for wasting his youth. "But thou, contracted to thine own bright eyes, feeds thy light's flame with self-substantial fuel, making a famine where abundance lies, thyself thy foe, to thy sweet self too cruel." Shakespeare changes the metaphor from flowers, which grow and multiply, to flames and light, which burn bright and die fast. And it gets even worse. Check out the start of the following sonnet. "When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held." I mean, holy crap! He's pretty much saying, okay, hot stuff, sure, you look good now, but wait until you're 40 and you will be a tattered weed of small worth. Which is, kind of harsh. Just cooperate. This approach, call the young man out for being too self-obsessed, and tell the young man to settle down and have kids, is repeated in a myriad ways throughout the first 17. And here's where Shakespeare invokes the tradition of earlier sonneteers, by employing central arguments or metaphors known as conceits. Each poem seems to have one central conceit that shows this idea of fleeting youth. Shakespeare uses the rising and setting sun, lo, in the orient when the gracious light lifts up his burning head. He uses wasted money, unthrifty loveliness, why dost thou spend upon thyself thy beauty's legacy? The changing seasons, then let not winter's ragged hand deface in thee thy summer, ere thou be distilled. Or he appeals to the public good. The world will be thy widow and still weep, that thou no form of thee hast left behind. In Sonnet 12, Shakespeare gets right to the point with one of his most dominant conceits: time.
When I do count the clock that tells the time, and see the brave day sunk in hideous night, when I behold the violet past prime, and sable curls all silvered o'er with white, when lofty trees I see barren of leaves, which erst from heat did canopy the herd, and summer's green all girded up in sheaves, borne on the bier with white and bristly beard. Then of thy beauty do I question make, that thou among the wastes of time must go, since sweets and beauties do themselves forsake, and die as fast as they see others grow. And nothing 'gainst time's scythe can make defense, save breed to brave him when he takes thee hence.
It's no accident that Sonnet 12, like the 12 hours of the day, starts with the line, "When I do count the clock that tells the time." All of the images that follow, both the plants in nature and the crops being harvested, are all under the domain of the scythe of time. Shakespeare will become more and more obsessed with time and with the young man, but for the moment the poet is still somewhat detached and objective, speaking as a third party, mostly showing off his words smithery, synthesizing images like the white silk on ripe corn and the white beards of old men. But we know that most of the sonnets aren't just some weird Hallmark cards saying, "Hey wrinkles, have babies." So where does Shakespeare go from here? Well, it seems that he starts to move beyond his commission and actually starts to develop feelings for the young man. Instead of just calling him beautiful, in Sonnet 10, for the first time, the poet says that he actually has feelings for the young man, and not just for his good looks. And this attraction starts to grow. In Sonnet 13, the poet uses the word "you" all over the place, showing how captivated he's becoming. And in Sonnet 15, one of my all-time favorites, he goes even further. When I consider everything that grows, holds in perfection but a little moment, that this huge stage presenteth naught but shows, whereon the stars in secret influence comment. When I perceive that men, as plants, increase, cheered on and checked even by the selfsame sky, vaunt in their youthful sap, at height decrease, and wear their brave state out to memory, then the conceit of this inconstant stay sets you, most rich in youth, before my sight, where wasteful time debateth with decay to change your day of youth to sullied night, and all in war with time for love of you, as he takes from you, I engraft you new. This poem barely mentions procreation, but it introduces a very important theme. The poet is so in love with the youth that he will preserve him, not with babies, but with poetry. Also, check this out. Shakespeare is using images of stars, and so he starts the poem with the word consider, which comes from the word sidereus, which is Latin for stars, which is also where we get the English word sidereal. Isn't that cool? There are other themes that begin to emerge here, conceits that Shakespeare will become fascinated with. Not only images of nature's growth, but of the ongoing war that the poet wages with his great nemesis, time. Time changes everything. It brings every summer into winter and every life into death. And the poet begins to change. He starts a war against time. He begins to speak more intimately to the fair youth. He begins pleading rather than persuading, motivated by something much deeper than just writing poems to pay the bills. This is a huge change. The poet starts falling for his subject, and he struggles to find a way to put that enormous feeling into words, to put it down on paper without falling into the gushy, overblown, phony poetry of his predecessors. By the end of this sequence, he finds a new tactic: beautiful, honest simplicity. The last poem of this sequence, Sonnet 17, shows how Shakespeare can be simple and genuine while still expressing a feeling that is utterly enormous.
Who will believe my verse? in time to come if it were filled with your most high deserts. Though yet heaven knows it is but as a tomb which hides your life and shows not half your parts. If I could write the beauty of your eyes, and in fresh numbers number all your graces, the age to come would say, this poet lies. Such heavenly touches ne'er touch earthly faces. So should my papers, yellowed with their aging, be scorned like old men of less truth than tongue, and your true rights be termed the poet's rage and stretched meter of antique song. But were some child of yours alive that time, you should live twice, in it and in my rhyme.
I love that line. If I could write the beauty of your eye. I find it amazing and a little comforting that even Shakespeare is tongue-tied by what he feels. This is actually a rhetorical device called apophasis, where you say something by saying that you'd never actually say it. But it shows two important things. Shakespeare is striving to be as true and sincere as possible, to reject flattery and phony adulation, but also that Shakespeare, or at least the poet, is falling in love. If Shakespeare did write these poems on a commission from the young man's dad, then this is a pretty big escalation. But whatever the case, it's clear that the poet is moving into a much more intimate, heartfelt style. And while he might not have succeeded in getting the young man to put buns in the oven, he did succeed in creating something much more profound and eternal. It's good. A huge thank you to my guests for this episode, the remarkable actors Louis Butelli and Renea Brown, both appearing in A Midsummer Night's Dream with the Folger Shakespeare Theatre, whenever we're done with this whole plague thing. Tune in next time as we explore the next sequence in the sonnets, Shakespeare in Love. Please don't sue me.